So welcome everyone, good evening. We want to thank you for joining us tonight for our fourth virtual viewpoints event of 2021, which is titled Filling the Gap, Conservation Easements for the Finger Lakes region and Updates on Land Conservation. So I'm Lindsay McMillan, I'm the Association Director with the Canandaigua Lake Watershed Association. And we're gonna welcome tonight's presenter, Max Heitner of the Finger Lakes Land Trust in just a few minutes. But first, we're gonna just go through a couple of minor housekeeping items. You'll notice everybody was muted upon entry to the meeting tonight. We're gonna hold all of our questions until the end of the presentation, and Max assures us he's saved plenty of time for Q&A, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. So many of you I know are CLWA supporters, so thank you. But those that are new to us, just a little bit more about our organization. We are a member-supported nonprofit focused on preserving, protecting, and restoring the health of the watershed for future generations. And we strive to foster a sense of environmental stewardship amongst residents, businesses, and other stakeholder groups, partners like the Finger Lakes Land Trust. And we really just hope to get people excited about ways they can help protect our local environment. So a couple of our most recent initiatives have included, we just hosted a series of gypsy moth egg scraping events here in April and May at area parks, including Stead Hill, Gannett Hill, and Bear Hill. We had 120 volunteers that showed up to participate in the events. And actually we were successful in enabling to prevent over 22 million gypsy moth caterpillars from hatching. And so while we know this is still an ongoing issue and that may feel like a drop in the bucket, it's a really great way to get people out, get them involved, learning about trees and the importance that they have to our watershed. We're also gearing up for a great season of water quality monitoring, which includes our shoreline harmful algal bloom monitoring program, which we're going to be starting in July, and our Secchi water clarity program. And both of these activities they're really engaging water quality volunteers and getting more active in monitoring the health of the lake. And it gives us more eyes on the lake to help us assess overall conditions, and which in turn helps us better communicate with you, watershed residents, about the current condition of the lake. And then over the last year during COVID, we've been doing a lot of virtual programming, and we're really happy to start easing back into some smaller in-person programs too. So we've got a couple of great ones coming up, including a guided invasive species hike with the Finger Lakes PRISM, which is the Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, which is going to be next Friday, June 11th at 10 o'clock a.m. It's going to be down in Naples. And we're also going to be hosting a rain barrel workshop later in the month with Ontario County Soil and Water Conservation District. It's going to be the evening of Wednesday, June 23rd at Outhouse Park in Canandaigua. So check out our website. We've got information on our website about both these events, including how you can register and get more involved. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of great ways to get involved. So consider becoming a CLWA member if you're not one already. You can follow us on our various channels here to stay connected to our activities and opportunities to learn and participate. We're on Facebook. We have an Instagram page. There's also a YouTube channel where our previous talks are posted. So make sure to check it out and check out our website for those great upcoming events as well. So at this time, I'd like to send it over to one of our really great volunteers, Sonia Carnevale, who's also a CLWA board member, and she's one of our outreach team members who puts together these great talks for our members. So she's going to introduce our guest speaker, Max, tonight. So over to you, Sonia.
Hi, everybody. I want to just thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Max Heitner for his presentation on conservation easements and an update on land conservation in the Canandaigua watershed. Max graduated with a BS in natural resources from the University of Illinois, and then he went on to get his master's at the University of Michigan. He's worked at Cornell University and California State Parks. He joined the Finger Lakes Land Trust about 3 years ago, and he is now the Director of Conservation, focusing on acquiring new properties and easements throughout the Finger Lakes region and also working on partnerships for conservation projects. So Max, we are so happy that you could join us tonight and teach us all about this. We're really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you, Lindsay. Really appreciate you having me. Happy to be here. So I'll share my screen. So I'm here to talk about conservation easements, to talk about some projects in the Canandaigua Lake watershed. And I think you'll see, I'm glad Lindsay started and showed a little bit about the Canandaigua Lake Watershed Association. And if some of you are members, I think you'll see some overlap between the Watershed Association and the work that the Land Trust does. So I hope you'll find it interesting and look forward to answering any questions you may have after we get through with the slide deck. So some topics we'll discuss is an overview of regional landscape conservation, some reasons of why one might want to conserve land, why are conservation easements one of these solutions, and what are the steps involved with a conservation easement, and then we'll talk about some projects in the watershed. So this map shows you the service area for the Finger Lakes Land Trust in the Finger Lakes region. And some of the colors you'll see are various conservation lands. The main color is green, which shows both state forests, state parks, the national forest in Schuyler County. In purple, you'll see some conservation easement properties and various other conservation lands in the region. And one thing that stands out is that our region does not have a high percentage of conservation lands. That percentage, as it stands today, is estimated at around 13%. And in comparison to Western states that are filled with national forest lands, wilderness areas, borough of land management lands, national forests, those many Western states are filled with a high percentage of public conservation lands. In New York, we are mostly private property, and our conservation lands, whether private or public, are on the smaller side in this region, with most of the conservation lands in the state being in the Catskills and the Adirondacks and eastern part of upstate New York. So what some numbers that you might see in the news regarding conservation are 30 for 30, which is both statewide and federally a new goal from the President Biden, the new administration, as well as state government, looking at how to conserve 30% of lands and waters in the country and in the state of New York by 2030. Now, that doesn't mean we're trying to conserve 30% of the Finger Lakes in that time, but in general, there is a call to action to conserve both waters and lands around the country. And so why might we want to conserve lands? Well, some part of this reason is for landscape connectivity and wildlife movement. In our current landscape, a mosaic of villages, towns, cities with fragmented habitats interspersed between, wildlife viability and the ability of wildlife populations to survive and thrive can be more challenging. And so conservation is looking at strategic properties to conserve, to create linkages between habitat patches, to create corridors for wildlife movement, or to expand the size of habitat patches so that genetically diverse populations of animals and plants can survive. Another element is climate change. We know moving forward that plants and animals need to move. They need to move to northern latitudes. They need to move to higher elevations. And so when we look at a model like this, in in the world of conservation, we're thinking, how can we connect blocks of forest? How can we enable our plants to migrate up into the hills if they need to, or into northern latitudes as the climate changes over the next century and beyond? So one of the things we look at when we're prioritizing properties, talking about project selection criteria, all these elements that go into, what are the conservation projects that we'll take on. We look at outside models. We look at this is a map that shows models from the Nature Conservancy, from the state of New York and the Natural Heritage Program, and from the Wildlands Network, that showcases climate resilient areas, forest blocks and linkages, and corridor areas. And it helps us to spatially analyze the region at what might be areas to prioritize for conservation. This is in addition to looking at comprehensive plans, planning documents for local communities, and the New York State Open Space Plan, all of these elements that go into helping to inform us where are focus areas for us to work. Another element that we look at a lot is water quality, where the Finger Lakes Land Trust and the health and quality of the lakes is paramount to the future of the region. And at the same time, we can't forget that almost half of our service area is part of the Chesapeake Bay and the Susquehanna in terms of drainage. So, all of these areas in the southern part of the southern tier drain south and eventually lead to the Chesapeake. And then the Finger Lakes watersheds drain north into Lake Ontario. And doing conservation projects that protect and restore water quality are a big element of our focus. And so a couple slides ago, we talked about climate change in the context of plant movement, wildlife movement, migration to higher elevations or northern latitudes. But at the same time, climate change is also having impacts right now in that storms are heavier. We're getting heavier rainfalls and less of the drizzly rainfalls, but just higher concentrated flows that then run down our highway ditches into our creeks and eventually make their way into the lakes. And this, combined with the warming of the water bodies and invasive mussels and all of these aspects, help to create a situation like harmful aquatic blooms. So these harmful aquatic blooms are cyanobacteria in high concentrations. And we typically call them a toxic bloom when they have the presence of microcystin. There's other toxins they could have as well. They can cause sickness and real threat to pets, and a threat to the drinking water supply, the recreational opportunities on these lakes. And it's a problem that is really paramount to this region. Here's a photo of a bloom on Owasco Lake. And there's a few reasons that it occurs. There's all sorts of reasons why nutrients flow into the lakes to create the conditions to where a bloom might occur. You could have a failed septic system from lakeshore cottages. You could have impermeable surfaces from nearby development. You could have concentrated flows running down roadside ditches, and you could have manure pileups from local agricultural fields. All these things together all lead to higher nutrient concentrations in our waterways. Here's another look at some flows of highly turbid waters filled with sediment and nutrients entering the lake. And when we talk about the agricultural inputs to this, we can't ignore the Green Revolution. And this is a period in the 20th century where farms needed to make changes to compete at the global level and to create efficiencies. And so we find larger farms that have more inputs to be able to have higher yields to keep pace with the global marketplace. And so it's important for our local foods and for the viability of our local agricultural economy. And at the same time, there are some nutrient impacts to this type of agriculture. And here, is a view of some of the concentrated flows that you get in roadside ditches from tilling, which increase the yields on the field to be able to drain the water faster off the fields. But at the same time, those faster concentrated flows in the roadside ditch can lead to issues for water quality for our lakes. So, conservation solutions. What could be some solutions to climate change, to wildlife, habitat fragmentation for wildlife and plant species, for water quality? There are conservation solutions. And at the Finger Lakes Land Trust, we really focus on these three: of protection, of restoration, and of planning. So the organization has a four-pronged mission. Our mission takes into account scenic vistas, local foods, clean water, and wild places for everyone. Some quick stats on the organization is over 25,000 acres of protected. There are over 35 publicly accessible nature preserves throughout the region, over 46 miles of hiking trails. And the most importantly, the organization is about its people. And we have over 2,700 members now and over 200 volunteers who do everything from trail maintenance to writing newsletter articles to helping with management plans, being on our board, etc. So don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any interest in membership or volunteering for the Land Trust. So, and now as we talk about land protection, you see here our mission: to conserve forever the lands and waters of the region, ensuring scenic vistas, clean water, local foods, and wild places for everyone. And we do it a few different ways. We create preserves, which are land trust owned properties, and these are often habitat patches. We do transfers. This is where we convey lands to public agencies, other partners, which is oftentimes increasing a habitat patch size. And then we do easements. And these are on private properties, and they can be, depending on their size, sometimes they're a habitat patch unto themselves, sometimes they're connecting other valuable conservation lands. So an example of a land trust preserve in the watershed is the West River Preserve. This is right on the southern end in the Canandaigua Highlands, in close proximity to Nundawow, the Great Hill Preserve, which is another Finger Lakes Land Trust preserve that are open to the public. At this one, you'll find a nice view area, some interpretive panels, and these are all free and open to the public and owned and managed by the organization. Then an example of one of these transfers with conservation partners are some of these big blocks. You have High Tor right here in the foreground. You have Bear Hill and Great Hill and Bear Hill up to north, the Bristol Hills. As we look at the lake, doing cooperative acquisitions with the state of New York is often the way to increase these patch sizes, create connections, as the state of New York is the greatest holder and manager of conservation land in the state. But as you look at this map, you'll see some colors that pop up. This shows you our projects, both where they are and their size. And in green are our nature preserves, in purple are our transfers, and the color that sticks out to you is orange. And that's because in order for us to fulfill our goals in conservation long term, these orange dots represent conservation easements. And the title of this presentation is Filling the Gap. And that's what these easements do. Oftentimes, many of the most valuable, most scenic properties in the region might already be protected. They might be state parks, they might be state forests or wildlife management areas, they might be a land trust preserve. But the easements are key to filling the gap, and to be able to go from 13% to 20% conservation, to be able to connect a network of linkages and corridors of wildlife habitat and of migration corridors for plants and areas of buffers for water quality, these easements play a really pivotal role. And so they are our most widely utilized conservation tool. One of the reasons that they're so important for filling this gap is because they maintain private ownership and status on local tax rolls. The Finger Lakes Land Trust is a tax exempt organization, nor does the Finger Lakes. So that, plus the fact that the Finger Lakes Land Trust doesn't have unlimited resources, we can't just buy our way to the amount of land that we want to see conserved in the region. So this private land conservation is a huge part of reaching these goals. There's federal and state tax benefits to donors of conservation easements. The land trust has a responsibility to monitor and enforce the terms of the easement. So the land trust will come to a property once a year and basically monitor that the conservation values are being upheld on the property. The easement is permanent. It lives with the property after transfer of ownership, and it helps to fill this gap in the conservation puzzle. So what these look like in terms of land management is that the easement will divide the property into different use zones with different permitted uses. So the zones differ by property, but what I included here is an example of a property with 4 zones that basically trend from most permissible to least permissible. So in pink, you see a residential active use zone where it's permissible to have a house and to do most any residential activities. In yellow is an agricultural management zone, and in that area you can clear anything and plant and do any agricultural activities. In green is a forest management zone, so there you're allowed to do a timber harvest with a forest management plan. So allowed to cut timber in the green zone, but you need to have a plan, but you can't clear it like you could in the yellow zone. And then finally in the blue zone, which is a buffer to Bear Swamp Creek, it is at what we call our environmental protection zone, and that's where you cannot cut timber, and is a highly restrictive zone in terms of what uses you're allowed in that area. So now what the actual document, the conservation easement is actually a deed of conservation easement. So the grantor is granting this deed of easement. So it starts with conservation values, and that's it's listing natural features, aesthetic features, scenic features, water quality features that are all reasons to protect this property. The second photo here you'll see, or it's Article 2, is about subdivision and conveyance. It's one of the main components of an easement, is that you're keeping a property whole and not permitting subdivision of the property into many small parcels. Next, you see a section on structures and improvements, and this is where these zones come in. So you see You might be able to have a residence, but that's limited to the residential zone. You might be able to have agricultural structures, but only in the residential or agricultural zone. To continue on, we have the forest management section, where it talks about how you can manage for non-native species and all various permitted uses throughout the property, but that if you want to do a commercial timber harvest, you would need a forest management plan. And finally, we have a mineral resources section, rights and duties of holder. This is just a selection of what is typically around a 30-page document, and then a notarized signature page, and then that's recorded with the county clerk's office. And in the back of the easement is the legal description on the right here, your property description, typically prepared by either a surveyor or attorney. And here is the survey, and the survey will have the different zones that were multicolored in that initial land plan map. Those zones will then be surveyed, and these are the lines that the land trust conservation easement steward, when they're visiting the property once a year, they'll walk these different zones and be able to monitor that the property is, that there's no uses being done that are not permitted by the terms of the easement. Another document that occurs with an easement is something called a baseline documentation report. And this is the current conditions of the property at the time the easement is granted. So you see a title page, a signature and notarization page, natural characteristics and ecological communities. There's a series of maps that come with these reports. Here's an ecological communities map, and then pages on pages of photos. This baseline documentation report has 229 photos. So this is a report that shows the property at the time the easement is granted, and it allows the monitoring team at the land trust, when they're conducting those annual monitoring visits, they can look at what the condition of various parts of the property were at the time it was granted. So a summary of easements is we can't buy our way where we want to be. That easements are the tool to fill the gap between key acquisitions. Sometimes they're fully donated, sometimes they're partially funded by grant programs. There's the Farmland Protection Implementation Grants Program with the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. There's the Water Quality Improvement Projects Program with New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Those are two state-funded grant programs that we often utilize to partially fund easement projects. Completion of a conservation easement includes multiple documents, including the deed of conservation easement itself, the baseline documentation report and survey. And let's all grab our shovels. You can be involved in this as a volunteer, as a member, if you have a property and you're interested in land conservation, you can be involved. So let's shift the focus a little bit to the local watershed and look at Canandaigua. So here's a couple maps. The one on the left showing the Western Finger Lakes from Keuka to Canisius. And on the right, we see a watershed map of Canandaigua Lake. So one recent project that we closed this year, just a couple months ago, is Kimberley Farms. This is a 600-acre conservation easement project, partially funded by the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. So it's one of these farmland protection implementation grant easements. And this is a 600-acre farm that's protecting prime and soils of statewide significance. In addition, it's also protecting a buffer area of the Paddleford Creek Greenway. And so that buffer area is surveyed and protected, in addition to all of the agricultural land that is protected from subdivision, and it enables this farm family to continue its multi-generational farm story. Another project for right now is Canandaigua Vista, and this is a new nature preserve that will be opening later this year. You can see the concept map on the right showcases the concept of where the parking area will be and the trail network. This project is 2 fee acquisitions that make up the preserve itself, and then 2 easement acquisitions to ensure the some of the scenic resources from the property and buffer from some development around it. And it's an exciting project that we're excited to open to the local community. And so what I'll do now is play a quick video. And then after this video, we'll be able to do some Q&A. So finally, my contact information. There's the mailing address for the land trust, main location in Ithaca, New York, the office line, my cell number, and my email address. If you have any questions that are not answered during the Q&A, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And so now I'll stop sharing and we can do the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Max. Some really good information. I think I love the title of your talk, Filling the Gap. I mean, just the way you explain that, I think is really helpful for people to understand that you know, they can be part of the solution here. Individuals can help us get closer to that 30% number. So thanks for taking the time to explain that.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So we'd love to open it up for Q&A at this point. If anybody has any questions, feel free to use the chat feature in the bottom here. I'm going to open it up right now, so feel free to put them in. To kind of get the ball rolling here, I actually had a question, because so often there are these little pockets of land that, I mean, I think we all see as Watershed residents always seem so valuable, and we always want to protect them. Is there a general guidance that the Land Trust offers in terms of, you know, acreage that the Land Trust would be interested in? I can imagine that smaller pockets are kind of harder for an organization to steward the land year after year. So I just didn't know if there's like a general guidance that you guys have for residents that are looking to perhaps donate land or get involved with easements.
For sure. And, you know, our selection criteria is a bit nuanced, and it depends. It's a terrible answer, right? That it depends. But, you know, we're looking at things like what waterway is it on? What are, is there restoration potential? Is there potential for partnering with the local soil and water conservation district or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on a planting project or a wetlands project to build a buffer? Is, if it's going to be a nature preserve, is it big enough? Is there area for trails, for public access? Is there a need for public access in this area? Are there views? So it's, and then are we going to be the long-term owner and steward? So the nature preserves were the long-term owner and steward. Easements were the long-term holder of the easement. There's also these transfer properties that we'll do. A good example of a transfer acquisition locally is Grimes Glen, where we worked with the county to secure the property and then create this county park. And so it really depends on all these factors, on whether it's something like Canandaigua Vista, where it's a new nature preserve that we are going to own and manage for the long term. Is it a property that a local village or town is interested in managing as a park, and they just need us to secure it and then transfer it? That might be something we're able to do. Or an easement, where it depends on all these different resources. Does it have agricultural resources, forest resources, scenic resources, and is there's restoration potential for water quality? So it's a gray area. We don't have a cutoff in terms of acreage, but in general, if it's very small, it's going to have to hit all these other criteria points for us to be willing to be able to do the project.
Yeah, and actually one of our first questions kind of builds upon that. They said, I have a 17-acre camp in Cayuga County that I'd like to protect. Should I email Max the details? How does this impact the property value and tax basis? Sure.
So yes, you can email me the details, and what our process is we'll take intake information on a landowner that's interested in conservation, and then we'll map the property. And we'll put it through our selection criterion. At the same time, we have a lot of information we can then share with the landowner. In terms of taxes, there's both a federal and a state tax incentive related to conservation easements. The state tax incentive is a tax credit, which is a percentage of property taxes that gets refunded to you. And then the federal tax incentive is a tax deduction on income. So it's a bit different, and it depends on the value of the easement, on whether the federal incentive is worth it. It requires an appraisal and a bit more steps involved, but those are both available. And then in terms of impact on tax, we don't find that assessments by the local tax assessor's office get reduced from easements very often. So it typically the easement, while it does impact the market value for a property, we often don't find that the assessor's office will reduce assessment value very often.
Great answer.
Max, could you explain some of the legal fees involved? You mentioned 3 methods of protection. The preserve owned by the FLT transfers and the easements, they all involve some legal fees, don't they?
Definitely. So, the land trust uses a suite of attorneys. We have a bunch of different attorneys who represent us on various projects. And so the land trust has its own legal representation, and then any landowner that is either selling, donating, or bargain selling any land or easement to the land trust is almost always going to have their own legal representation that will have a fee similar to a typical real estate transaction.
Okay, did that answer your question, Rob?
Those fees apply to all 3 methods of protection?
Yeah, so the nature preserves and the transfers are what's called fee simple. It's the whole property is being transferred. And so that's more typical of any land acquisition. And so both the land trust will have an attorney representing them, and then the landowner who is selling or donating the land typically will have an attorney representing them when conducting that transaction. The easement, at the same time, a different type of real property transaction, but still a real property transaction. Typically, the landowner will have an attorney. It's not required, but typically they'll have an attorney represent them when donating or selling a conservation easement as well.
Okay, another question. This is a great one. If a farmer owns land that lays in more than one township, what is the best way to explore a potential new conservation easement? Should they start with towns or the Finger Lakes Land Trust? They would like to continue actively farming on leased land to a new farmer. They're within the Canandaigua Lake Watershed and within current landscape connectivity zone.
Great. It can go either way. It depends where you are. Certain towns and counties have a pre-application form if what you're interested in is the Farmland Protection Implementation Grants Program, which is the partially funded conservation easements. So in some of those, you'll submit a pre-application to your town or county, but not every town or county has one. So if your town or county doesn't have a pre-application process, then you can send information directly to us and go through the process that way. So it depends exactly where you're located, but I would check out your agricultural advisory board or committee in your town or county and just see if they have a pre-application process for farmland protection grants. They're often referred to as PDR or purchase of development rights.
Great. Okay, a question from Dana. Can a conservation easement exist on a property enrolled in a 480A forestry program?
That's a good question. I believe an easement can be, but I can't confirm. I can't confirm that right now, whether some elements of our conservation easement language would conflict with some of the requirements of the 480A program in terms of the management of your forest. So the answer is I'm not sure and would have to look into the details of the program and whether any elements of the language of our conservation easement, the deed of conservation easement, would conflict with the requirements of the 480A program that could then lead to disenrollment from the 480A program. So that would involve a conversation with Cornell Cooperative Extension and figuring out the details on how to make them compatible.
Great. Okay. There's no other questions right now. If you do have remaining questions for Max, feel free to type them in the chat here, or you can also unmute yourself too. I know Rob did that earlier, so feel free to do that. Sometimes it's a great way with a group this size to just unmute yourself as well. So feel free to do that too. I'm really excited. I know you played that great video. The Canandaigua Vista property. I mean, what a gem that's going to be, and what an incredible opportunity for people to enjoy the watershed. So, hats off to you guys at the Land Trust. I know you guys have been working really hard on that, and we're really excited to be able to enjoy it in the coming year. So look forward to partnering with the Land Trust as well in the future on events there and different ways to get our members involved with the Land Trust and learning more about your work.
Definitely, yeah. We're excited about the preserve. It's going to be able to invite the public to that site, which has just beautiful open space views. It's got a nice gorge area. It's a really great combination of things. And the town has lake access on Barnes Gully, further down the gully, and so one can combine it into a really great day. And so it's a project we're excited about, and we look forward to opening it to everyone very soon.
It's going to be wonderful. Okay, one more question here that just came in. So Heidi asks, who provides information included in the easement agreement? Is this the responsibility of the landowner or the land trust?
Great question. So the land trust has an easement template that is the starting point. So basically that is a document that's gotten reviewed by many attorneys over the years and is our starting point in terms of the language of the deed of conservation easement, but every property is different, and each property requires, specific language and specific permissible uses. So the easement is customized with the landowner from that point, from that starting point.
And then Dana asks, how long does it typically take to set up a conservation easement from start to finish? It's a great question.
It is a great question. And I would say the range is anything, a fully donated conservation easement. Typically, the range can be maybe 12 to 18 months. Some of that process includes going through some land trust processes that include approval from our land committee and then approval from our board of directors, to then the project implementation, which includes doing the land planning with the landowner, the conservation easement drafting and language with the landowner, and then updating any title work and doing title review with an attorney, getting a survey done on the property, both of those, that external boundary as well as those internal zones, and then that baseline documentation report right before granting the easement, and finally then closing. So for a fully donated easement, I would say a year to a year and a half, maybe. A grant funded easement, the farmland protection easements or the water quality improvement easements, can be a bit longer because you do have a funding entity that's then reviewing your project elements. So, it might be two to even 3 years for some of those grant funded projects.
Okay. Oh, this is a good one. This is a good question. You might get this a lot. Is hunting allowed on a property in a conservation easement if it is held by the landowner?
Sure. So hunting is similar to public access in that those are rights that are retained by the landowner who owns the property. So the landowner is granting the Finger Lakes Land Trust this easement to monitor the property, to uphold its conservation values. But some things we do not get involved in are who accesses the property, and things like hunting, that those are permitted on the property if the landowner wants to permit them. It's up to the land, it's at the landowner's discretion. Part of this is that the intention of these documents are items that the land trust can monitor when they're there once a year. And so the land trust basically just can't monitor whether someone is allowing hunting or not on the property, or public access or not on the property. Plus, we don't have interest in being involved in it. Hunting is something the land trust supports, especially deer management. We do have a deer management program, a permit-based program on our nature preserves. So we have certain preserves enrolled in the deer management program, and a certain amount of permits that go to local hunters to be able to hunt on our nature preserves as well.
Great. Okay, if you have any last questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Heidi asks, are there any grant programs for regenerative forestry like there is for farming and water quality?
So yes, actually, an exciting change with the farmland grant program is their most recent round 18. And Heidi, if you get in contact with me after this, I can send you some information on this grant. They added a whole bunch of criteria for regenerative forestry and for water quality, source water protection, farming lands. And so they opened up this program, which for years has always been a great program, but didn't include every type of farm. And now if you're a maple sugaring operation, you can qualify under this program, or another type of mixed fields and forests, both forestry and farming type programs can potentially qualify with the Ag and Markets FPIG, or Farmland Protection Implementation Grants program.
Great information. Okay, well, feel free, if you got a couple more questions, feel free to get them in the chat. But you know, I really wanted to thank you for taking the time tonight to share with us a little bit more information on the land trust. If is there any activities you guys have going on this summer? Anything you're excited about to share with our members? I mean, I think people are looking to get outside. Are you guys offering any hikes this summer that people can look for?
So yeah, thanks, Lindsay. So if you go to fllt.org and click on events, we do have things going on. We're doing a kind of distance bio blitz right now where people can participate with that with the iNaturalist app. We do have volunteer work days happening. If you want to do any type of work at some of the nature preserves, those are happening. Our typical education events called Talks and Treks are still mostly online focused right now, but they will be moving to in-person again very soon. So we look forward to having more in-person events in addition to our volunteer events that are currently happening. So yeah, fllt.org/events if interested in participating in any of those.
Wonderful. And then I would just request, you know, I know you shared it earlier in the presentation, but would it be possible for you just to type in your email address right into the chat so that anybody that has follow-up questions can just kind of copy and paste that so they have it handy? That would be wonderful.
Perfect. Yep.
Great. Gordon says very informative. We'll be in touch. So sounds good, Gordon. Thank you for tuning in tonight, everybody. I appreciate you spending a Wednesday evening with us. We did record the talk, and we'll make that available on the CLWA website probably within the week. We usually post them on the videos page. Max obviously will share it with the land trust too, and you guys can post it as well. So you know, thanks for taking the time this evening. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Okay.
Take care.